Tonight, we're going to explore something that movies and TV shows have gotten completely wrong for years. What real medieval battles were actually like. You've seen the films shining knights riding across wide, green fields, swords flashing. In perfect patterns, heroes moving through crowds of enemies with barely a scratch. But the truth was very different. Real medieval warfare was messy, exhausting, and far from glamorous. If you suddenly found yourself on an actual battlefield from that time, the noise, the crowds, the mud, and the confusion would be overwhelming. Tonight, we're going to walk through what it was really like to be an ordinary person caught up in a medieval war from the day you were called to serve, all the way through the experience of being part of an army. Before we begin, if you enjoy this kind of deep dive into history, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories reach around the world. Alright, let's get comfortable and step back in time together. We'll discover why being an ordinary soldier in the Middle Ages was much more about duty, hardship, and survival than about glory and adventure. Let's start with the very beginning. How most people ended up in the army in the first place. The surprising truth is that almost nobody volunteered. The vast majority of soldiers were ordinary farmers, craftsmen, and laborers who were required to serve. This was part of the feudal system. If you were a peasant and most people were, you owed service to your local lord. When the lord needed an army, he called on the people who lived on his land to join it. The way it usually happened was simple but unavoidable. One day, the lord's bailiff, a kind of official representative or a sergeant, would arrive in your village with a few armed guards. He carried a list of names. When your name was read out, you were told to report for service within a few days. There was no choice in the matter. Imagine you're a farmer named William, about 30 years old. You have a wife, 3 young children, and a small piece of land that your whole family depends on. It's planting season, the most important time of the year. If the crops aren't planted now, there'll be little food next winter. But none of that changes anything. The bailiff calls your name. You have 3 days to gather what you can and report to the meeting point. Refusing wasn't really an option. If you didn't show up, you could lose your land, and your family would be left with nothing. The whole system was built to make sure people appeared when called. Villages were small, usually just 100 or 200 people, and everyone knew one another. Running away and starting over somewhere else was almost impossible. Even if you tried, your family would face serious consequences in your place. The rules made it clear. The safest path for everyone you cared about was to answer the call. When you arrived at the assembly point, you found hundreds of other men just like you. Some were neighbors you recognized. Others were strangers from nearby villages. Everyone looked worried and tired. A few professional soldiers, knights, and men-at-arms who had trained for years might be there too. But they were only a small part of the army, maybe 5 or 10%. Most of the men were ordinary farmers and workers with little or no real training. Villagers were supposed to hold regular practice sessions, often on Sundays after church. In theory, every able-bodied man was meant to learn basic skills with weapons. In reality, these sessions were very basic. The village might have only a couple of old spears or a bow that needed repair. An older villager who had once served might show everyone how to stand in a line or hold a weapon properly. The rest of the time was spent listening to instructions and waiting. It wasn't serious preparation, and most men hoped they would never actually need it. Now you're part of a much larger army. Medieval armies weren't neat, uniform forces like modern ones. They were made up of separate groups, brought by different lords and nobles. The king had his own household troops. Dukes, earls, barons, and even bishops brought their own men from their lands. Sometimes mercenary companies, professional fighters hired for pay joined as well. Each group had its own equipment, training, and loyalty. Getting everyone to work together smoothly was a real challenge. The noble leaders usually looked down on the ordinary levies. To many of them, the farmers and laborers were just extra numbers to fill out the ranks. A few lords treated their men with respect and fairness, but many saw the common soldiers as less important than their horses or hunting dogs. Standing there on the assembly field, you look around at the people who will be beside you. There's Thomas, a friendly farmer from the next village. There's a quiet teenager who looks nervous. There's an older man who has served before and keeps giving quiet advice. There's mixed groups, strangers, neighbors, young and old is now your army. Finally, let's talk about equipment. Professional knights had fine armor, swords, and shields. Most ordinary soldiers did not. You were expected to bring whatever you could from home. Many men arrived with simple tools adapted for defense. A sharpened billhook used for trimming hedges, a sturdy woodsman's axe, or a heavy hammer from the workshop. Some had old spears or basic padded jackets for protection. It wasn't much, but it was what most people could manage, with your basic tools in hand and your everyday clothes on your back. You stood there in that busy assembly field, surrounded by hundreds of other ordinary men. Most had brought whatever they could from home, simple farm tools, like a sharpened hook for cutting plants, a sturdy axe for chopping wood, or a heavy hammer from the workshop. Spears were the most common choice because they were easy to make, just a long wooden pole with a metal point attached. They allowed you to keep some distance in a crowd and were straightforward to handle with a little practice. Real protection. Like the strong metal armor worn by knights, was far too expensive for most people. It could cost more than a farmer might earn in many years of hard work. Instead, many men wore thick wool or leather tunics if they had them, everyday clothes that offered a bit of padding. Some added extra layers by stuffing straw or cloth inside their shirts for a little more cushioning. A few luckier ones, perhaps those with a bit more saved up, might have a padded jacket called a gambeson, made from quilted layers of fabric, stuffed with wool. It was warm, flexible, and could soften a strong bump or push, but even those were rare and often handmade. For head protection, creativity was key. Some men used boiled leather, shaped into a simple cap. It was lightweight and affordable. Others tied a metal cooking pot on top with straps, which might sound funny, but actually helped deflect light knocks. It was all about making do with what was available. As more groups arrived over the next few days, the field grew crowded. The experienced soldiers, those who had trained for years, watched the new arrivals quietly. The leaders on horseback gave orders through their sergeants, who passed along instructions clearly. Everyone was getting organized into larger groups, ready for the journey ahead. Food was another challenge right from the start. The army tried to provide supplies, but getting everything to everyone was tricky. Wagons sometimes got stuck, and food could spoil on the way. Each day, you might receive a portion of coarse bread made from basic grains and baked to last, and some weak ale or water to drink. It wasn't fancy, but it gave you energy to keep going. Occasionally, there might be a bit of cheese or dried meat shared around, though fresh vegetables were hard to come by. Then came the order to begin marching. This part of the story, the long journey to wherever the army was, needed as often. Skipped quickly in movies, but it was a huge part of life for medieval soldiers. Armies had to travel on foot, covering many miles over days or even weeks, and it required a lot of patience and strength. A typical day's march might cover 15 to 20 miles, depending on the group's pace. That doesn't sound too far at first. But remember, you were carrying everything you needed. Your tool or spear, a rolled-up wool blanket for resting, a small sack with any extra bread or personal items, and a leather bottle for water that could add up to 20 or 30 pounds on your back. For someone used to working on a farm, it was tiring but doable at the beginning. The paths weren't like modern roads. Many were just dirt tracks worn down by years of travel, bumpy when dry, with rocks and roots to watch for, and very slippery when wet. Rain was common in many parts of Europe, turning those paths into thick mud that made every step harder. Your shoes or boots, simple leather ones, tied with cords, would get heavy and soaked. Sometimes they'd wear out quickly from all the walking, and you'd have to wrap cloth around your feet or make quick repairs in the evenings with whatever thread you carried. Weather added its own challenges. On rainy days, wool clothes absorbed water and felt heavier, making it harder to stay comfortable. You'd dry off as best you could at night by a fire if one was allowed. On hotter days, the sun could make everyone sweaty and thirsty. So finding clean streams to refill water bottles was important. Rest stops along the way gave everyone a chance to eat, share stories, and look after their gear. Camp was set up each evening, tents for the leaders, simple blankets on the ground for most others. Fires were lit for warmth and to bake more. Bread, if supplies allowed. Men from different villages got to know each other better during these breaks, talking about home or helping fix a neighbor's worn-out shoe. Insects were another everyday nuisance on long marshes. Flies and mosquitoes buzzed around, especially near water or in warmer weather. Everyone learned to wave them away or cover up as much as possible. Lice were common too, living in clothes and hair, no matter how carefully you tried to stay clean. They were hard to avoid in such close quarters. Staying healthy on the march took effort. Minor aches from all the walking, itchy bites, or upset stomachs from coarse food were part of daily life. Men helped each other out, sharing tips for wrapping sore feet or passing around a drink of water. The key was keeping moving together as a group, supporting one another through the tiredness. And that's where we'll pause again, somewhere along a long, muddy path, with miles already behind you and many more ahead. Learning just how much endurance an ordinary medieval soldier needed before even reaching the main gathering point. After many long days of steady marching, dealing with tired muscles, changing weather, itchy insect bites, and the occasional upset stomach from unfamiliar food or water, you and the others in your group finally start to feel a real sense of teamwork building. Men from different villages begin sharing tips that make the journey a little easier. How to wrap cloth around sore spots for extra cushioning, where to find the clearest streams for filling water bottles, or simple ways to dry out damp clothes. By an evening fire, neighbors look out for one another, passing around the last bits of bread or helping carry an extra pack when someone's load feels too heavy. It's in these small acts of kindness that strong friendships form, even among people who started out as strangers. Common illnesses were part of long travels like this. With everyone walking closely together and sharing the same basic meals, minor fevers or tummy troubles could spread quickly. When someone felt under the weather, the group would slow the pace a bit if possible, offering extra rest or sips of water. Experienced travelers might share herbal teas made from plants found along the path, or just sit and talk to keep spirits up. Most men recovered, with a few days of lighter duties and extra care from their new companions. It was a reminder of how important it was to stick together. Helping one person often helped the whole group stay strong. The evenings brought their own routine. As the sun dipped low, the army would choose a wide field or clearing to stop for the night. Everyone spread out wool blankets on the ground after brushing away the biggest rocks and twigs for a smoother spot. Fires were lit in small groups for warmth and to warm up any leftover bread or heat water. The sounds of camp were full of life, quiet conversations about home and family, someone humming an old song, the crackle of the fire, or friends laughing over shared memories from the day's walk. If rain came, men would huddle closer under shared blankets or prop up branches for simple shelters, turning it into a chance to tell stories and pass the time together. Sleep wasn't always easy on the hard ground, with stiff joints in the morning and the cool night air, but waking up to the sound of horns or friendly calls meant another day of moving forward as a team. A quick breakfast of bread and water, a few stretches to loosen up, and everyone was ready to line up again, stronger from the bonds they built along the way. Somehow, after weeks of steady effort, you reach the main gathering area. You're tired, your shoes are well worn, and everyone is leaner from the simple meals, but you've made it. Now the full army comes together, thousands of men from different regions, all joining for the same big purpose. Medieval armies were like large, extended families brought together from many places. At the top was the king or leading lord, surrounded by trusted advisors and experienced riders who planned the best paths and strategies. Below them were smaller groups, led by local nobles, each bringing their own neighbors and workers. Everyone had a role. The trained knights and professional soldiers shared helpful tips, while the everyday farmers and craftsmen brought practical skills, like fixing tools or finding good resting spots. Getting everyone to work smoothly wasn't always simple. People spoke different local dialects, or even completely different languages: English, Welsh, French, and others all mixed together. Commands sometimes led to friendly confusion, but the army used clear signals everyone could understand: raised banners, drum beats, or horn calls that meant move forward, stop, or group up. Over time, men learned these together, turning mix-ups into chances to practice and laugh about later around the fire. Rules were strict to keep the huge groups safe and organized. Leaders made sure everyone stayed together, shared supplies fairly, and looked out for one another. Breaking rules meant extra duties or public reminders of how important teamwork was. No one wanted to let their friends down. In the days before any big gathering or movement, camp life became a busy community. Men spent time repairing gear, sharing stories, or listening to encouraging words from chaplains who reminded everyone of duty, home, and the value of sticking together. Merchants and craftsmen traveled along too, offering useful items like new cord for shoes or extra cloth for padding. The whole camp felt alive with purpose people trading small favors, helping fix a neighbor's blanket, or joining in group songs to lift everyone's mood. And that's where we'll pause once more settled into a large, bustling camp filled with new friends and shared routines, preparing for whatever challenges lie ahead, knowing that the real strength comes from working side by side. As the days in camp went on, the whole area felt more and more like a big, busy village brought together for an important shared goal. Traveling merchants and craftsmen set up their stalls around the edges, offering useful items that helped everyone stay ready. Extra cord for repairing shoes, simple tools for fixing gear, or small bundles of dried herbs for making soothing teas. They traded fairly with the soldiers, knowing that keeping the army supplied was part of supporting the effort. Some even shared stories from their travels, adding a bit of variety to the evenings. Priests and chaplains moved kindly through the groups, holding daily services and offering words of encouragement. They reminded everyone of the value of duty, faith, and looking out for one another. Many men found comfort in joining the group prayers or sharing quiet talks about home and hope. Healers and helpers were there too, ready to tend to sore muscles, minor aches from the long marches, or tired feet. They used clean clothes, basic ointments made from plants, and plenty of rest to help men recover quickly and stay strong. Evenings in camp were a special time for building closer bonds. Fires dotted the fields, casting a warm glow as groups gathered around them. Men shared simple meals, told stories from their villages, or sang familiar songs that everyone knew. Laughter often rang out as friends recalled funny moments from the march, like the time someone's pack slipped in the mud, or how they all learned a new way to tie their blankets for better shelter. These gatherings helped ease the tiredness of the day and strengthened the sense of being part of something bigger. Some men formed small circles of close companions, watching out for each other's belongings and sharing whatever extras they had: a spare piece of bread, a patched up spot on a jacket, or just a listening ear. These friendships became like family, built on trust and the many miles walked together. The professional knights and experienced leaders lived a bit differently, with better tents, sturdy equipment, and helpers to keep everything in order. Their strong armor, carefully made and well-maintained, protected them in tough situations, and their trained horses helped them lead from the front. Many of these leaders were fair and respectful, making sure supplies were shared as evenly as possible, and offering helpful advice to the newer men. They understood that every person in the army played an important role, and the best ones worked hard to keep everyone motivated and cared for. As time passed, you found yourself checking your gear more carefully, sharpening your tool on a smooth stone, wrapping extra cloth for better padding, or tightening loose bindings with strips of leather. It wasn't fancy, but it felt good to be as prepared as possible. Talking with neighbors who had a bit more experience gave useful tips, and soon everyone was helping each other get ready, with word spreading that the big gathering with the other side was approaching. Just a few miles away, the mood in camp grew more thoughtful. The commanders met to plan carefully, and clear instructions were passed along through the groups. The evening before the main event felt especially meaningful. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft colors, the whole camp settled into quiet reflection. Priests led beautiful outdoor services, with thousands of men gathering peacefully on the grass. Songs of faith filled the air, and the words spoken were full of hope, reminding everyone of the importance of courage, kindness, and doing one's duty. Many men took time for personal prayer or quiet talks with friends, mending any small misunderstandings and sharing heartfelt words. Old neighbors hugged and promised to watch out for each other. New friends from the march spoke about how much they appreciated the support along the way. "You've been a true companion," someone might say, or "I'm glad we've shared this journey together." These moments brought everyone closer, turning worry into a shared sense of purpose and calm strength. Thoughts often turned to home, the familiar fields, loving families waiting far away, the simple joys of everyday life. It all felt precious, like a warm memory to carry forward. Sleep came slowly that night, with the stars overhead and the soft sounds of the camp settling down. But there was a deep peace in knowing that everyone was united in faith and friendship. And that's where we'll pause once again on this thoughtful evening filled with songs, prayers, and strengthened bonds, ready to face the challenges of tomorrow side by side. Drawing courage from the community built along the way. As the evening deepened and the last light faded from the sky, the priests finished their blessings and stepped back into the quiet camp. Their words had been clear and strong. The cause was righteous. The enemy stood against what was good and true, and standing firm tomorrow would be an act of faith as much as duty. God watched over everyone who fought with a clean heart. The same message was spoken on the other side too. Both armies had their chaplains offering comfort and courage in exactly the same way. In that moment, no one questioned it. Everyone simply held onto the hope that something greater was guiding them. With the prayers done, the night settled in. Most men turned back to the one thing they could control: their gear. You sat on the ground, legs crossed, and ran your fingers along the edge of your spear again. You'd already done it so many times that day, but you did it once more. The wood felt smooth under your hand. You checked the metal tip for any tiny nicks, tested the balance by holding it upright, then wrapped a fresh strip of cloth around the grip so your sweaty palm wouldn't slip tomorrow. It wasn't really about the weapon anymore. It was about keeping your hands moving and your mind from wandering too far into the what-ifs. Busy hands meant less room for panic around you. Others did the same. A neighbor quietly sharpened his axe with a small stone, the soft scraping sound blending into the low hum of the camp. Someone else adjusted the padding in his tunic, stuffing in a little more straw or old cloth. Simple tasks, repeated over and over, became a kind of quiet ritual that helped everyone feel a tiny bit more ready. A few men tried to eat. Someone passed around the last pieces of coarse bread. You took a bite, chewed slowly, but it felt dry and heavy in your mouth. Your stomach was knotted tight. Food just didn't seem important anymore. Some soldiers managed only a sip of weak ale before setting the cup aside. Others couldn't keep anything down at all. Anxiety turned their stomachs, and soon you heard quiet retching here and there in the darkness. No one judged. Everyone understood. The camp already smelled of smoke, sweat, wet wool, and earth. A little more didn't change much. Those who could, right, or who found someone who could, sat close to the small fires and dictated short messages home. A farmer next to you spoke softly to a clerk holding a scrap of parchment. "Tell my wife I love her. Tell the children I thought of them." Every day, ask them to look after the goats and the little field by the stream. And if I don't come back, tell them I tried to do right. The clerk wrote carefully, nodding. Most of these notes would never reach their families lost, damaged, or simply never sent, but saying the words out loud felt important. It was a way to reach across the miles and hold on to the people waiting back home. Sleep was impossible for almost everyone. You lay on your blanket, staring up at the stars, listening to the camp breathe. Coughs, soft prayers, the rustle of someone shifting position, the occasional quiet sob that someone tried to hide. Men rose now and then to walk a few steps away for nervous relief. Equipment jingled faintly as someone else checked their gear. Yet again, the darkness made everything feel heavier. In the daylight, you could see faces, see friends, see the line of men beside you. At night, your mind painted pictures you didn't want to see, quick flashes of tomorrow, of chaos, of not making it through. You pushed the thoughts away and whispered another prayer instead. Some men tried to slip away in the shadows, hoping to disappear into the fields and find a path home. Most were caught quickly. Sentries walked the edges of camp in pairs, eyes sharp, voices low but firm. The punishment for leaving was known to everyone, and no one wanted to bring that shame on their family. So most stayed, not because they felt brave, but because the alternative felt even worse. Your friends were here. Your neighbors were here. If you ran and they stood and fell, how could you ever face their wives and children again? Staying was the only path that still held a shred of honor. The knights and nobles rested in their tents, eating better food, roasted meat, fresh bread, a cup of wine. Their squires helped them check every buckle and strap of their armor worn. Last time, they were nervous to every man feel something before a fight. But they had more protection, more training, and the knowledge that if things went badly, they might be taken alive for ransom. For them, survival was more likely. For you and the others like you, there was no such safety. If captured, there would be no mercy. That difference sat quietly between the groups, unspoken but understood. As the hours crawled toward dawn, the camp grew still. A few men finally drifted into shallow, exhausted sleep. Others lay awake, repeating simple prayers under their breath, personal, honest words that asked for strength, for safety, for one more sunrise with their families. Some made quiet promises. If they lived through tomorrow, they would be kinder, work harder, give more to the church. In that moment, the promises felt real and unbreakable. When the first pale light touched the eastern sky, the camp began to wake. Men rose stiffly, shook out blankets, took care of morning needs, checked gear one final time. A little bread was passed around, a swallow of ale if anyone had it. Stomachs were too tight for much, but everyone tried. Then the sound everyone had been waiting for and dreading cut through the morning air. Horns blowing, drums beating, sergeants calling out sharply, "Form up, get in line, move." The army stirred. Sergeants and older soldiers moved among the groups, guiding men. With firm hands and clear voices, they pushed gently but steadily, helping everyone find their place. Here, stand next to your friend. Hold the spear low. Keep your shield if you have one close to your side. Orders came in different tongues, but the meaning was passed. A long, quickly point, gesture, example. Men shuffled into rough lines, shoulder to shoulder, breathing fast. The lines weren't perfect, but they were together. Friends stood beside friends. Neighbors stood beside neighbors. Everyone drew strength simply from seeing the others there, ready to face the day as one. And that's where we'll pause, standing in line at last. Heart pounding, hands tight on your weapon, surrounded by the men who had marched and waited and prayed with you, all of you stepping forward together into whatever the morning would bring. You shuffled into your spot in the large formation, right there among the hundreds of men you'd gotten to know over the long march and days in camp. Your heart beat quickly with a mix of nervousness and excitement, echoing in your ears over the calls of the sergeants and the steady rhythm of the drums. The experienced professional soldiers took their places up front and along the sides, where they could lead and guide everyone best. They moved with calm confidence, double-checking their tools and gear as if it was second nature after years of practice. You and the other ordinary farmers and workers filled in the center and back sections. Your role was important too, adding to the group's overall strength and presence, helping the whole line look solid and united. Medieval army formations could differ depending on the time and place, but they often followed basic ideas that emphasized working together. The setup was usually a long line, several rows deep. The front row held long poles or tools pointed forward for clear direction. The rows behind were ready with their own items, prepared to step up and support if needed, keeping the group flowing smoothly. The line wasn't perfectly straight at first. It shifted a bit as everyone adjusted, finding the best spot to stand. Strong without crowding too much. Sergeants walked along the back, offering helpful reminders to stay in place and work as a team. The spacing was close and cozy, with men standing shoulder to shoulder. If someone had a shield, it overlapped with the next person's for better unity. This closeness was on purpose. It made the whole group feel connected and harder to disrupt. You couldn't move on your own without coordinating with the others, which encouraged everyone to communicate and stay in sync. If you were fortunate, you ended up next to a familiar face, maybe a neighbor from your village or a new friend from the journey. That made things easier. You could share a quick look, a nod, or a quiet word of encouragement, reminding each other that you were all in this together. If not, you stood beside strangers who shared the same sense of purpose, or perhaps one of those steady, thoughtful men who seemed deeply focused already picturing how the day would unfold. The air carried the familiar scents of the camp smoke from last night's fires, the earthy smell of wool tunics, and the fresh sweat of a busy morning. Some men took deep breaths to steady themselves, while others shared a quick sip of water or a kind word to ease any jitters. Around you, voices rose in soft prayers or familiar chants, like Hail Mary, full of grace, repeated gently as a way to find comfort and focus. Across the wide field, perhaps 300 to 500 yards away, the other group was organizing their own formation. From afar, they looked like a distant crowd, a shifting sea of colors and banners, all getting ready just like you. Both sides called out cheers and rallying words to build energy and show unity. Shouts like "For God and the King" or "St. George" echoed back and forth, creating a powerful wave of sound that lifted everyone's spirits and made the moment feel alive with shared purpose. Bright banners fluttered high above the lines, displaying your Lord's colors or symbols of saints as reminders of home and higher ideals. These flags were key. They marked where leaders stood and gave everyone a point to focus on if the group needed to adjust or come together more tightly. Drums started their steady beat, boom, 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 vibrating through the ground and into your feet, helping everyone keep time and adding to the sense of rhythm and togetherness. The knights, sitting tall on their strong horses, gathered on the sides or just behind the main line. They looked impressive in their well-kept gear, ready to move forward at the right moment to add their speed and strength to the group's efforts. Until then, they waited patiently, a symbol of the coordination that made the whole army work. Archers, if your side had them, stepped to the front or edges. English longbowmen carried their tall 6-foot bows, crafted from years of practice that built their skill and endurance. French crossbowmen had their sturdy devices, reliable and strong. They prepared to send their arrows first, aiming to signal or demonstrate from a distance before the groups got closer. And there you stood, waiting in that moment of anticipation. It might last just a few minutes or stretch to an hour, giving everyone time to settle in, breathe deeply, and focus on the teamwork ahead. Your legs felt a little unsteady at first, not from tiredness, but from the build-up of energy buzzing through you. You tried to stand tall, not wanting to show any nerves, but everyone felt it, the shared thrill of the unknown. Your hands gripped your tool firmly, knuckles pale from holding on, palms a bit damp from the morning chill. You'd wipe them on your tunic, adjust your hold, and grip again. A small routine that helped center your thoughts. You recalled the basic practices from back in the village, simple drills on how to hold your spear steady, keep any padding or shield close, stay connected in the line, and support the group. Those sessions had been short and straightforward, led by locals who shared what they knew, but they planted the seeds of working as one. No one felt perfectly prepared, but that was okay. The real strength came from being there together. Now you could see the other group, more clearly, individual faces emerging from the distance, though still far off. They looked focused and determined, just like your side. Everyone was there for their own reasons, representing their homes and leaders, ready to show what they could do. Then, from the commanders up front on their horses, came the clear call, advance. The whole line moved forward together, a bit uneven at first, but gaining steadiness as everyone found their rhythm. Coordinating thousands of steps wasn't simple, but with cause, gentle pushes from sergeants, and the natural flow of the crowd, the group began to progress. You walked steadily, matching pace with those around you. The ground was bumpy in places, marked by old paths and grassy spots, but you navigated carefully over roots, stones, and soft earth. Your mouth felt a little dry from the excitement, even after that morning sip of ale. You swallowed and kept going, the line holding strong. The other group grew nearer, their details sharpening helmets, tunics, the same mix of everyday people stepping forward with purpose. As the distance narrowed to about 300 yards, the archers on both sides got to work. The English longbowmen, with their powerful bows drawn from lifelong training, released arrows in unison 10 to 12 per minute, an impressive display of skill. The sound was unique, the creak of strings pulling back, then a whoosh as they let go, followed by the whistle of arrows soaring through the air like a strong wind rustling leaves. You watched the arrows from your side climb high into the sky, forming a graceful arc before descending toward the field ahead. For a brief second, they seemed to pause against the clouds, casting faint shadows. Then they landed with soft thuds on the open ground, a practice show of precision and range that marked the start of the day's events. And that's where we'll pause once more, moving forward as one united group. Arrows demonstrating the army's capabilities from afar. Everyone focused on the coordination and teamwork that defined these grand historical gatherings, ready for the next phase to unfold together. You and the men around you kept moving forward together, step by careful step, holding the line as best you could. The arrows from the other side rose high into the air, a dark, sweeping cloud that seemed almost graceful for a moment, like birds wheeling against the sky. Then they began to fall. The first impacts came with sharp, solid sounds, arrows striking wooden shields with heavy thuds, others tearing through fabric and padding with quick, ripping noises. A few found their marks. A man 2 or 3 rows ahead of you suddenly staggered, an arrow buried deep in his shoulder. He made a short, surprised sound and dropped to one knee. The men beside him didn't stop. They stepped carefully around him, helping him stay upright for a moment before the press of bodies carried them onward. Another arrow struck a shield right next to you with enough force to make the whole line jolt. The man holding it grunted but kept it raised, steadying himself against the shoulder of the person beside him. More arrows came. Some men were hit in the legs or arms and cried out as they fell. Others took glancing blows that tore cloth and skin but didn't stop them from moving. The pain was sharp and real, but the fear and the momentum of the group kept everyone pushing forward. No one could pause. Pausing meant being left behind, and being left behind meant being left alone. The distance kept closing. 200 yards, then 150, then 100. You could see the other group clearly now, the shapes of their helmets, the colors of their tunics, the determined way they held their own tools and shields. They looked just like your ordinary people, caught up in something much bigger than themselves, doing their best to stay together. Some men in your formation couldn't take the pressure anymore. A few turned, trying to slip backward through the ranks. Sergeants and older soldiers were quick to react. They grabbed arms, pulled men back into place, and spoke firmly, sometimes with a hand on the shoulder, sometimes with a sharper word or a nudge from the butt of a spear. "Stay with us," they'd say. "We're stronger together." Most listened, most returned to their spots. The group needed every person to hold strong. Then, at around 80 or 70 yards, the arrows slowed and finally stopped. The groups were too close now, too dangerous to risk hitting their own side. The drums beat faster. The shouts from both sides grew louder, blending into one long, rolling sound that filled the whole field. It was loud enough to drown out almost everything else. Loud enough to push fear to the back of your mind for just a few seconds. 60 yards. 50. Your heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. Your legs moved on their own, carried forward by the rhythm of the men around you. 40 yards. 30. The front rows lowered their long poles, creating a thick wall of points facing forward. You weren't in that front row, but you could see it clearly, the bristling line of wood and metal, ready to meet whatever came next. Then both sides broke into a run. The steady walk turned into a charge. Everyone surged forward together, feet pounding the earth, voices rising in one final shout. The two lines rushed toward each other like rivers meeting. The moment they met was enormous. The sound hit first to deep, crashing roar made of thousands of bodies colliding, shields slamming together, spears thrusting, men shouting and gasping all at once. The front ranks crashed into each other with full force. You weren't at the very front, but the shock traveled back through the line like a wave. The men ahead of you stopped suddenly as they hit the other side, and you were pushed hard into them. Everyone behind you was pushed into you. In an instant, the whole group became one solid, heaving massed thousands of people pressed tightly together, moving only as much as the people in front allowed. This wasn't like the clean, open fights you sometimes imagined. There was almost no room to swing a weapon properly, no space to step back or dodge. It was a huge, crowded push bodies against bodies, shoulders against shoulders, everyone trying to hold their ground while the weight from behind kept driving everyone forward. Men in the very front rows used short tools, axes, hammers, dagger stabbing or striking at whatever was closest. Longer spears were harder to use here, but some men managed to thrust them forward into the mass ahead, hoping to find a gap. The ground turned soft and slippery almost immediately. Blood and churned earth mixed together into a thick, dark mud. Fallen men, some still moving, some not, became part of the footing. You stepped carefully, trying not to slip, trying to keep your balance in the press. Sometimes your foot landed on something soft that shifted under your weight. You didn't look down. You just kept moving forward with the group. Through it all, the men around you stayed close. If someone stumbled, a hand reached out to steady them. If someone cried out, a quick word of encouragement came from a neighbor. "Hold on," someone would say. "We're still here." The line bent and shifted, but it didn't break. Everyone was part of the same effort, pushing, holding, supporting one another through the chaos. And that's where we'll pause, right in the heart of that tremendous meeting of two great groups, pressed together in the struggle, drawing strength from the people standing shoulder to shoulder with you. Every step forward, a shared effort to keep going. The struggle continued in that tight, heaving mass of men, everyone pushing, holding, and supporting one another as best they could. When you thrust your spear forward, it sometimes met resistance. The scrape and grind as the point caught against bone, sending a sharp vibration up the wooden shaft and into your hands. The man in front of you might let out a sharp gasp, a short cry, or nothing at all if the strike was sudden and final. Then the crowd's movement would carry him away, and another figure would fill the space almost immediately. Other times your thrust missed, completely glancing off a raised shield, sliding along a piece of rough padding, or cutting through empty air as someone shifted or fell. In that split second of imbalance, you felt the quick reply from the other side. A hard knock against your arm, a sharp tug at your tunic, or a glancing blow that left a stinging line across your shoulder. The pain flared bright and hot, but it felt strangely distant, as though your body had decided to save the full ache for later. You registered the hurt, knew you were bleeding somewhere, but the need to keep your feet planted and stay with the group overpowered everything else. The noise never stopped. All around you were the sounds of effort and strain, thousands of voices shouting encouragement, calling out to friends, crying out in pain or surprise. Metal rang against metal with sharp clangs. Wood cracked and splintered. Wet thuds came when something struck flesh. Men called names, mothers, brothers, God, sometimes in quick, desperate bursts, sometimes in long, broken sobs. The sounds blended together into one continuous roar that filled your ears and chest, drowning out almost every other thought. Dust rose in thick clouds, kicked up by shuffling feet, mixed with a sharp, metallic smell of blood and the earthy dampness of churned ground. Sweat ran into your eyes, mixing with grit, making everything sting and blur for a moment. You blinked hard, wiped your face with a sleeve when you could, and kept going. Time lost all meaning. A minute felt like forever. An hour might have passed in what seemed like moments. The world shrank to the space immediately around you, the shoulders pressing against yours, the men in front and behind, the steady rhythm of push and hold. You weren't fighting one person at a time. You were part of something much larger, single, living force, trying to move forward together, trying to stay whole. Then, without warning, something changed. You felt it first in the pressure. The constant, grinding push from the other side suddenly softened, just a little. The shouts from across the line shifted less fierce, more ragged. A banner somewhere ahead dipped and wavered, then fell. A ripple of movement spread outward. Men began to glance sideways, craning their necks to see what was happening. A voice shouted, something, maybe they're breaking, or the flank is gone. And even if it wasn't true, the words carried, the change spread quickly. First a few men at the edges turned and began to back away. Then more followed. The steady wall of bodies started to give, inch by inch at first, then faster. Battle cries turned into cries of alarm, then into something closer to panic. The formation that had held so stubbornly began to loosen, then crack, then dissolve. When the break came, it came all at once. Men dropped their tools. Some threw down shields. Others simply turned and ran, eyes wide, mouths open in silent terror. The bonds that had kept everyone together, shared marches, shared campfires, shared prayers, vanished in an instant. It was every person for themselves now. If you were part of the group that held firm, the field suddenly opened up. The other side was no longer a solid wall. It was scattered figures sprinting in every direction. Horses thundered past as the knights and mounted men moved forward, their heavy animals carrying them swiftly across the open ground. The sound of hooves grew into a rolling drumbeat, then sharp, wet impacts as lances and swords found their marks. Men fell, tumbled, were lifted off their feet and thrown aside. Foot soldiers followed, moving quickly but carefully, helping one another stay safe in the sudden, open space. They moved among the fleeing figures, offering aid where they could, steadying a wounded friend, calling out to keep groups together. The pursuit spread out across the field, but it was never chaotic. The commanders shouted orders, keeping everyone aware of where the rest of the group was. If you were among those who had to run, the world became a blur of motion and fear. You sprinted with whoever was closest, sometimes a friend from the march, sometimes a complete stranger trying to reach the edge of the field. A wood line, a stream, anywhere the horses couldn't follow easily. You dropped anything heavy, a broken spear, a torn shield, even boots if they slowed you down. Every ounce mattered when survival was measured in seconds. Some men dropped to their knees, hands raised, hoping for mercy. A few were spared, especially if they looked like they might be worth something to someone higher up. But most kept running, lungs burning, legs shaking, praying for just a little more strength, just a little more distance. The field itself had changed. What had been grass and earth was now a churned, dark expanse, marked by the traces of the struggle. Bodies lay where they had fallen, some still, some stirring weakly. The air was thick with dust and the sounds of distant shouts, hooves, and the occasional cry. The numbers told their own story. The actual moment of collision, the pushing, the pressing might have lasted only an hour or two, and losses during that time were often fewer than people imagine. But once one side broke and the running began, that was when the toll grew heavy. The pursuit could stretch for miles, across fields and into woods, until the horses tired or the commanders called everyone back. And that's where we'll pause. On a field that had seen everything: courage, fear, effort, collapse, pursuit, and finally silence. The day's work was done, but the cost was only beginning to be counted. After the dust settled and the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance, the field grew strangely quiet. The chaos of the day gave way to an eerie stillness, broken only by the low groans of the wounded and the soft calls of those searching for friends. If you were one of the lucky ones who had stayed with the group, held your place, and seen the other side break first, you now stood on a field that had been completely transformed. The grass was gone, replaced by deep, dark mud mixed with everything the struggle had left behind. Bodies lay scattered in every direction, some still, some moving weakly, calling out in thin voices for help or for water. You and the others began the slow work of gathering together again. Friends looked for friends. Men from the same village called out names, hoping to hear an answer. If someone was hurt but still breathing, hands reached out to lift them. to carry them back toward the camp or to a safer spot near the edge of the field. Stretchers were made from shields and cloaks, or simply from linked arms. No one was left behind if they could be helped. The bonds formed during the long march and the long wait in camp proved their worth here. People refused to abandon one another. For those who had been carried off the worst of the fighting, the next hours were about simple care. Water skins were passed from person to person. Someone with a steady hand would press clean cloth, or the least dirty piece of tunic they could find against a bleeding wound to slow the flow. Others built small fires to warm chilled hands and feet. Chaplains moved quietly among the men, offering prayers and gentle words, reminding everyone that they had done their duty and that they were not alone. The wounds themselves were often serious. A deep cut from an axe or a spear might leave a wide, ragged opening where muscle and skin had been torn apart. A hard blow from a hammer or mace could crack bone or leave deep bruising that swelled quickly. An arrow that had struck at an angle might leave a puncture that went deep, carrying dirt and threads of cloth inside. These were not the neat slices seen in stories, they were messy, painful injuries that bled heavily and throbbed with every heartbeat. Medieval people did what they could with the knowledge and materials they had. Experienced helpers, sometimes older soldiers who had seen this before, sometimes local healers who traveled with the army, would clean wounds as best they could using water from streams or boiled water if time allowed. They packed cuts with clean linen or wool to stop bleeding. For deeper wounds, they might try to draw the edges together with strips of cloth or thread, though the results were often imperfect. Honey, which some knew had a way of keeping things cleaner, was sometimes smeared over the injury before bandaging. Herbs like yarrow or plantain were crushed and applied, based on long tradition of what seemed to help. If a limb was too badly damaged, shattered bone, torn beyond repair, there was sometimes no choice but to remove it. This was done quickly and carefully by those with the steadiest hands. Several strong men would hold the person still while the cut was made as swiftly as possible. A hot iron or boiling oil was used to seal the end and slow the bleeding. It was painful beyond words, and many men fainted from the shock, which was, in some ways, a kindness. Those who stayed awake were given whatever comfort their friends could offer, someone to hold their hand, someone to speak softly to them, reminding them they were still here, still part of the group. Infection was the greatest danger. Wounds almost always became red, hot, and swollen within a day or two. Fluid might build up, and a bad smell could develop. When that happened, the outlook was serious. Helpers changed bandages often, kept the area as clean as possible, and encouraged the person to drink water or weak broth to stay strong. Some men recovered slowly over weeks, their bodies fighting off the worst of it. Others grew feverish, confused, and weaker each day. In those cases, friends stayed close, offering water, wiping their foreheads, and praying together. When the end came, it was met with quiet, respect. Boulders were laid out carefully, and simple words were spoken over them. The survivors who could still walk helped collect what could be salvaged, dropped tools, torn cloaks, scattered belongings. Nothing was wasted. Horses were rounded up, wagons loaded with supplies, and with those too hurt to move on their own. Slowly, the group began to move again away from the field, towards safer ground, toward home if they were fortunate. For those who had been separated in the confusion, the journey back was harder. They walked alone or in small groups, following familiar paths, rivers, or the tracks of the army. They lived on whatever they could find: berries, roots, water from streams, and avoided large roads where they might be seen as stragglers. Many eventually found their way back to their villages, often weeks later, thin and weary but alive. Families who had waited with worry rushed out to meet them, embracing them, helping them inside, feeding them, and listening to whatever they were ready to share. The battle was over. The field would slowly heal, wood would slowly heal, would wash the worst away, grass would return in time. But the men who had stood there would carry the memory forever, the weight of the press, the sound of thousands of voices, the feeling of friends at their sides when everything else was chaos. They had survived not because they were the strongest or the bravest, but because they had stayed together, supported one another, and kept moving forward as one. And that's where the story ends, not with glory or banners, but with the quiet, stubborn strength of ordinary people who faced something enormous and came through, one careful step at a time, together. After the fighting ended and the field grew quiet, the real work of caring for one another began. You and the men who had stood beside you during the long struggle gathered together again. Friends searched for friends among the fallen. Neighbors called out names, hoping to hear a familiar voice answer back. If someone was hurt but still breathing, hands reached out, quickly lifting them gently, carrying them on linked arms or makeshift stretchers made from cloaks and poles. No one who could be helped was left behind. The same people who had shared bread on cold nights, who had prayed together under the stars, who had kept each other steady in the hardest moments, now refused to abandon one another. Wounds from the day were often deep and serious. A heavy blow might leave a wide, jagged cut where skin and muscle had been torn apart. A spear strike could go deep, carrying dirt and threads of cloth inside. A hard strike from a hammer or mace might crack bone or leave heavy bruising that swelled painfully. These were not clean injuries. They bled heavily, throbbed with every heartbeat, and made even small movements difficult. The men did what they could with the knowledge and materials they had. Clean water from nearby streams was used to wash away as much dirt as possible. Strips of cloth torn from tunics or spare linen were pressed firmly against bleeding places to slow the flow. For deeper wounds, helpers tried to draw the edges together as best they could, using more cloth strips or careful tying. Some knew to use a little honey, which seemed to keep things cleaner than plain water alone. Crushed leaves from plants like yarrow or plantain was sometimes placed over cuts, based on long family traditions of what helped small hurts. Everyone worked together, someone holding a wound closed, while another tied the bandage, someone else bringing fresh water or holding a hand for comfort. If a limb was too badly damaged, bone broken in many places, or flesh torn beyond repair, there was sometimes no other choice but to remove it. This was done as quickly and carefully as possible by the steadiest hands available. Several strong men would hold the person still while the cut was made swiftly. A hot iron from the fire or boiling water was used to seal the end and slow any bleeding. It was extremely painful, and many men fainted from the shock. Those who stayed awake were given every bit of comfort their friends could offer someone to hold their hand tightly. Someone to speak softly and remind them they were still here, still surrounded by people who cared. Many who went through this survived, though recovery took weeks or months of rest, good food when it could be found, and constant care from companions. Infection was the biggest worry. Wounds almost always became red, hot, and swollen within a day or two. Fluid might gather, and a bad smell could develop. When that happened, the helpers changed bandages often, kept the wound as clean as possible with boiled water, and encouraged the injured person to drink as much as they could: water, weak broth, anything to keep strength up. Some men fought off the worst of it and slowly grew stronger. Others grew feverish, confused, and weaker each day. In those cases, friends stayed close, wiping foreheads, offering sips of water, speaking quietly, praying together. When the end came, it was met with quiet respect. The body was laid out carefully, simple words were spoken over it, and those who remained remembered the person as they had been. Kind, part of the group, for those who could walk. The next task was gathering what could still be used: dropped tools, torn cloaks, scattered belongings. Nothing was wasted. Horses were rounded up. Wagons were loaded with supplies, and with anyone too hurt to move on their own. Slowly the group began to move again, away from the field, toward safer ground, toward home if they were fortunate enough to be heading that way. The journey back was long and hard, especially for anyone carrying injuries. Every step could hurt. Food was simple and scarce: berries, roots, nuts, whatever could be found along the path. Water came from clear streams when they could be found. When villages or farms appeared, small groups would approach carefully, asking for a little bread or shelter. Sometimes people opened their doors, remembering the duty to help travelers. Other times they were wary, having seen too many soldiers pass through before. But many still shared what they could: a bowl of stew, a dry place by the fire, a kind word. Some men traveled in small groups for safety, watching out for one another, sharing whatever they had. Others walked alone, following rivers or well-worn paths, resting when they needed to, pushing on when they could. Weeks or even months might pass before they saw familiar hills or the smoke from their own village. When they finally arrived, thin, weary, often limping families rushed out to meet them. Wives, children, parents embraced them tightly. They were led inside, fed warm food, given a place to rest. Stories were told slowly, only when the person was ready. The village gathered to listen, to offer help, to make sure no one had to face the aftermath alone. The field itself would slowly heal. Rain would wash much of it away. Grass would return in time. Years later, a farmer might turn up an old arrowhead or a rusted piece of metal while plowing, a quiet reminder of what had happened there long ago. But the men who walked